Welcome to the Layman Seminary. Today I'm continuing my series on writing my seminary paper for the Kingdom and Covenant class. So if you can see this red box down here, it was 3 weeks ago last time I actually added to this series on this topic. Okay. And that was because, if I remember right, I started preparing for my next debate. And the way that I started preparing for my next debate, which is going to be the 15th or the 14th, whatever the Saturday is, uh, I continued my series on challenging Young Don Reborn, number 3. So I don't even know what's all in there, but I got 5 hours worth of stuff. Sometimes I have to go back and see, man, what did I cover? And then I was also doing the series So You Think You Understand Free Grace Theology, number 12. Now, for those that watch my shorts, the clips that we're taking the shorts from is like So You Think You Understand Free Grace Theology, number 5. So we got lots of content to chop up and put it in bite-sized chunks for people to interact with. Then officially, I made a video preparing to debate Larry Helms. But like I said, all of this stuff about free grace stuff was preparation for that. And then things just started falling in my lap again, and young Don debated Cassidy. So we did an after show of that. And then, I know I'm using and then a lot, but Eli came in and we evaluated his debate video. And so let me clear those boxes. And let's see what else happened after that. More Larry Helms stuff. The debate after show, Eli part 2. More Larry Helms stuff, and then 3 more Larry Helms stuff videos. So that means just counting the videos with Larry Helms' stuff on it, you got 3, you got 1, 2, 3. You got 5 videos with Larry Helms officially on there. So that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Anyway, I'll figure it out later on how much time is spent on that debate preparation directly as well as indirectly through dealing with Young Don and so on. But today we're talking about the Kingdom paper. And so let's get to that. Okay. It's Good Friday, so I don't have to work, which means it's a very good Friday in that sense. Whether you believe Christ is crucified on Friday or not, you know. But so I'm feeling like I can get a lot done on this paper. I'm hopeful, with this longer weekend. And also, as soon as Monday comes around, I'll probably already be in debate preparation for my debate. I think it's a Saturday. I have to check my schedule. But anyway, then I'll swing back after the debate. I'll swing back to the paper, put more work into that. So anyway, I did something a little bit different this time, and I'll show you. I'll go over this later on. Is I created my title page. Well, the first thing I did was I had a document called Kingdom Blueprint, and that's what all my work was in. And I'm like, you know what? I haven't touched this paper in 3 weeks. I'm going to open up a new document and title it something new and start transferring things over. And so this is Kingdom Paper Rough Draft April 2023, something like that. It will be changed later, but so then I'm like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and get a rough title page out of the way. And so that's what I did. I don't even know what I'm going to title my paper. So I just wrote the title for my Kingdom and Covenant paper and then everything like that. Then I got into the table of contents section. And this is where I really focused on. I'm like, all right, based on what I have now there's 18 pages of stuff that I haven't even transferred over into this thing because the paper's entirely too long. And so I got to be real selective about that stuff. Furthermore, what is in this document is it needs to be smoothed out and stuff omitted as well. So what I did was once I got the stuff I wanted to deal with in here, let me move this around. I go to view and click split. Okay. So this allows me to work on my table of contents and also look at the structure of my paper. So we have an introduction here. And so this introduction is 2 parts. And it's, well, actually this would have to be a different section. So I will make this number 2. And then this would be number 3. And then we'll have to fix 4 in a minute. But anyway, so my introduction, page 1 and 2, right? Well, now it'll be only page 1. Okay. And then, all right. So basically what I was trying to do here is I was trying to see, okay, what structure do I have? So my main structure for the paper is, I'm just going to highlight for now. Let me use a different highlight because I already used that one. Let's use blue. So we got their introduction. We got the 2 kingdoms just juxtaposed. And then we got the tracing the theocratic mediatorial kingdom through 9 movements. That's the main section, okay, of the paper. Then, what do we have? We have, this would be number 4 now. And I may be able to bring together the kingdom fulfillment thing and conclusion all together. It just depends. So those are my main structures, 1 through 4. Now subpoints, so far, my subpoints are, and I may change these later on, but I have movement 1 from creation to Babel, movement 2, the patriarchs until Sinai, movement 3, the Mosaic covenant and the theocratic mediatorial kingdom, movement 4, the decline and departure of the kingdom, movement 5, from the prophets to the incarnation, movement 6, the offer of the kingdom, movement 7, the rejection of the kingdom, movement 8, the interim age, and then the Messianic millennial kingdom fulfillment would be movement 9. I need to put movement. Okay, so that's the main structure. And I'm not going to go into the subpoints right now. But what I do want to emphasize is that if you're taking a class, and it's a class wherever they give you a sample paper, one good thing to do is after you've done your free writing, or you can do it even before then, is see how many pages did the person who wrote the sample paper talk about the content for the class. So like, this is actually, he's a friend of mine, but he's also the TA. And so he wrote this paper, and he's expanded it, and it's actually going to be a book. But he took this in 2021. And I think he even misspelled synthetic there, but we all make mistakes. So yeah. And so I'm like, okay, let me see how many pages his introduction is. Let me see how much he talks about Eden or classifies things. And then I just do that through all the main elements of his paper, right? And then I compare it to what I have. So like my first movement from creation to Babel, I have from page 2 to page 5. He covered that in just 3 pages, okay? So this tells me that when it comes down to, once I got my paper sounding like how I want it to be, then I'm going to have to make some decisions, what to cut. Because even though it may sound good and it may be polished and it has all the content that I would want to be in there, it may not meet the page requirement. So by going back and saying, okay, Dane covered this in 3 pages, I covered it in 5, 4, 3, 3 as well, then I'm like, okay, I'm good. But we got an issue right here when I'm into the Patriarchs unto Sinai, and I've covered that in 15 pages, and he covered it in 5 pages. So that tells me, okay, well, this is the area where I could start cutting. Maybe I'll end up having 5 pages like Dane. I don't know. But I'm going to start working in that area and start cutting. So, same thing here. I got 2 pages here and he's got 4. And I'm like, okay, well, hold on. That probably means I need to elaborate, because right now I just have my thoughts in that particular area just in short formatting and everything. And so what this allows you to do is it allows you to think about the content without having to read his content. You know, you're not reading his paper and then writing from that. That's not what you're doing. Instead, what you're doing is you're seeing how much he talks about each portion and using that as a way to gauge how much you should talk about each portion. And that way, especially if you overwrite, or let's say you underwrite. You know, if you overwrite, then this will help you limit yourself and focus. But if you underwrite, then this will push yourself, say, you know what? I just need to come up to 1 page to equal 3. So I'm just going to write some stuff here and just equal it up to 3, and I'm going to move on to the next section. Now you're going to come back later on and you may polish that up. You may cut something, you may add something, you may elaborate. But the goal is for you to get as much of it on paper in skeleton format, maybe even with a little bit of meat on the bone. And then later on, bring it to life based on the assignment and all that. So yeah, I did that. And so let me take it out of view mode. So now that I'm actually tired of writing my paper, because I woke up, I think I woke up around, I don't know, 3 a.m. It's 6 a.m. So the stuff that I just showed you, that's what I was working on. And I'm like, you know what? I don't feel like writing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a video, and I'm going to use a video to help motivate me to continue to work on this paper. So since we haven't done with this in 2 weeks, I'm just going to start out with the beginning and read through, and anything unnecessary I'm going to highlight right now, because later on I may decide if I'm going to cut it. Okay. Introduction. One basis for the dispensational premillennial faith is the literal interpretation. Let me make this bigger for y'all. One basis for the dispensational premillennial faith is a literal interpretation of the biblical covenants as support for the temporal mediatorial kingdom, TMK, which has its ultimate fulfillment in the Messianic millennial kingdom, MMK. This paper would trace the relationship between the biblical covenants and the TMK through 9 movements. Okay, and I just have these 9 movements listed in just brief format. I may not even include these 9 movements because my outline is going to tell you this, but for right now, just for spacing purposes, I included it. And then so you got those, and then you have it integrates other bases for the dispensational premillennial faith, such as hermeneutics, church history, theology within these 9 movements. Now, I may totally erase that. I may not do that in this paper. I've done it in other papers. So I may do that stuff in the footnotes. Who knows? But this is my working introduction for right now. The 2 kingdoms juxtapose. The eternal universal kingdom is a given. The Lord created everything and is king forever. It feels kind of terse, but I'm not worried about that right now. The eternal universal kingdom is eternal because he's eternal. It gives lots of verses for that. It is universal or comprehensive in scope because he is omnipresent. He directly rules it. The scripture basis for the EUK is not disputed by any conservative theologian. In contrast, the temporal meteor kingdom, so I won't be using this because I've already used TMK earlier. But anyway, is both distorted and disputed by theologians across the spectrum. The TMK is temporal because it relates to Earth and human history and culminates in a future Messianic millennial kingdom that has a physical locality. The rule of the TMK is mediated indirectly through humans that represent God. This involves God's providential and miraculous hand. The TMK is also dependent on humans to respond. The best way to clarify the nature and purpose of the TMK is a synthetic survey through the 9 aforementioned movements. there's some things I'm definitely going to take out, move around, trim up, and whatever. But I got to move forward, guys. I need to have something, a little something about everything in this paper. So as you see, I'm sitting at 30 pages, and like I told you, I got 18 more pages in another document that I can integrate into this. So my goal is to drop it down to 26, at least for today. And that's around the page, that's at the actual page limit of the paper once it's time to turn it in. But for right now, oh, cool. I've never seen this before. Multiple pages. I like that. Maybe y'all knew about that. You can look at multiple pages at once. I don't like that it went way back to there. Oh well. Tracing the theocratic Mediterranean kingdom through 9 movements. Movement from creation to Babel. Introduction. The TMK takes many forms throughout human history, and it has its beginning in Genesis. In fact, the eternal universal kingdom, the Trinity, creates the TMK realm consisting of time, space, and matter. Even though he delegated the angels to have a role in his plan, angels were never given the earth to rule. God gave the responsibility to humans to rule over the earth. God placed Adam in the garden to serve, worship, and work in the TMK. When Adam named the animals, he was following the example of God who delegated authority. Okay. The serpent's temptation and sin. The serpent usurped the theocratic structure from the first humans by temptation through an inverted order approach where he, as creature, chooses to go after the queen of the garden instead of King Adam. And so the issue, I like this, but this inverted order approach, I don't know if this is clear enough what I mean by that. But he's working from his bottom up. Perhaps the serpent heard Adam's initial response to seeing the woman that led him to believe that he could use Adam's intensity for the woman to turn him against God. The serpent may have wanted Adam to exalt the gift from God over God who gave the gift. That appears to be the test and temptation and arises in every stewardship responsibility at some point. That's true, but do I need that here? That's a question. While this may have been the serpent's immediate goal, his ultimate goal was to replace humanity as theocratic Mediterranean kingdom administrator. And so right now, I still got some questions here. Did the serpent, a fallen angel, actually possess the title King of Earth after the fall? Or is he a pretender? The attack was also against the created creature distinction. Or did the serpent merely disqualify Adam from filling their role perfectly? Satan is the first replacement theologian. Because he wanted him to replace the plan of God, if you will. I don't know if I'll include that, but I have that thought there. What role would the serpent crusher accomplish? Is he the Savior's seed? If not, so these are like interpretive questions, and I'm going to flip and turn into what I actually write. If not for the Bible given titles and names Satan indicated Satan succeeded in some sense in the fall, there may be reason to question if the TMK was transferred to him at that time and is under his sway like a mother over her unconscious child. So this is a reference to something Schaeffer had said, and so I got it footnoted here. I don't even know if I'm going to use it. Christ must succeed where Adam failed. After humanity rebelled and joined the serpent's counterfeit kingdom of darkness, God reveals his intentions to restore the TMK when he gets the seed promised. So there's some things in here that I'm definitely going to cut, smooth out. The issue is I got to remind myself, okay, if I go back to page split, I got to remind myself of this. Dane took about the creation of Babel in 3 pages. Okay, that's where I'm sitting at right now. But in this truncated form, I'm going, it's probably going to end up being longer. So my subpoints are introduction, page 2, the serpent temptation and sin, 2 through 3, the seed promise and messianic salvation, 3 through 5, Babel and the need for theocracy. So the section that we were just in is right here, 2 through 3. And so I'll probably have to do more work in there, which means it's going to become longer there. But so now we're on the seed promise part and messianic salvation. So for those that don't know what Messianic salvation is, let me draw some pictures. All right. So Adam and Eve were told in Genesis 3:15, right? They were told in Genesis 15 that we're just going to call him the crusher. The serpent crusher, right? The serpent crusher. So they know that they're going to have a seed, a descendant that is a serpent crusher, right? And that's all they know. Now, what's interesting is when we're talking about the crushing of Satan, you know, it uses the picture of, it says, I think it says he, so this would be the serpent, he shall bruise your heel, right? And so snakes, whenever snakes attack, they would usually strike at the heels, you know. And so this is a definitely shot. So some people would say this is even the crucifixion idea here, all right? But you shall bruise his head, okay? And head is Rosh. I think it's Rosh. I don't even remember how to spell it. But Rosh, let me, I'll just transliterate it. Rosh means head, or kingdom even. So the question you got to ask yourself, is this just focusing on positional salvation? And is the bruising of his head or crushing of his head only focused on positional salvation? Well, I would argue that there's three aspects to the defeat of Satan, okay? So let's make our chart for this. There's a positional defeat, and you can, we're not talking about the fall of Satan, that would be more categorized in this, but we're going to call this a positional defeat, right? And that happened at the cross. Then there's an experiential defeat, and this is used in Romans, where it says, may the serpent, may you triumph over the serpent shortly, or something like that. So this would be in the walk, because Satan is not bound right now, and moment by moment we have a chance to overcome Satan and even humiliate, because the cross was a humiliation, and every time that we choose God, the angels see that, and Satan is humiliated because it shows that he doesn't do, you know, he's not the wise planner. He's not the type of being that actually has any clout or weight to his arguments and stuff. And so those third of the angels are gonna be in deep regret at some point. I'm not talking about their salvation, but they're gonna wish, you know. But so then you got the ultimate defeat. Okay. Now this ultimate defeat, you know, it comes in different phases as well. You got the sense in which when Jesus Christ comes back, he ultimately defeats the Antichrist, right? And then he binds Satan. So we'll put the 1,000 years right here, 1K. So he ultimately binds Satan for 1,000 years, and then he's let out, and then he locks him up forever. So that the ultimate defeat is there, but we can put this in the ultimate defeat because these events are so close together as far as in time of everything, compared to this being this is the church, this is before the church, and this is after the church. So my point is that Messianic salvation is God's plan for the covenants to be fulfilled. And the thing is I've always argued, the covenants primarily are what I would call sociological rather than soteriological. And I'll write that out in a second. Let me go to clear this. And so let's go with red. Okay, so you have Genesis 15, you have 3:15 sitting right here. And this is describing we're just going to call it humiliation, humiliating defeat. And we know this occurs in phases. Well, one thing God does is he chooses Abram, right, in the Abrahamic covenant, promising them land, right, seed and blessing and all of that. And this becomes the basis for the Messianic millennial kingdom. And so this is really what Messianic salvation is all about. Messianic salvation reaches back and says, you know what? Whenever Adam and Eve sinned, it affected creation. Okay? So there's going to be Messianic salvation, I would even say, can include the new creation, as in the new heavens and new earth. But so this would be kind of like the second Adam imagery, all of creation groaning, Romans chapter 8, that type of thing like that. But then when you get to Abraham and stuff, this is Messianic salvation in particular, because what it teaches is that God is going to use as a basis of operation Israel. We could use an eye, or we could use a star, or whatever, or both. Anyway, that becomes the basis of operation for ruling the whole earth. Okay? So while this relates to the old earth being renewed or actually recreated, this relates to the earth since post-flood. So you basically have this idea that, okay, what happened with Adam and what happened with Noah is going to find its ultimate fulfillment when Christ is ruling over all of creation. We get that. But God has chosen to use his covenants to establish his basis of operation in the Messianic millennial kingdom. And so what this means is that when you're talking about Messianic salvation, you're talking about, if you want to use this language that Jews use, you're talking about repairing the world. I think it's called Tika Alam or something like that. We'll look it up in a minute. And some of them think it's going on now. And maybe you can make an argument that because there are blessings of the Abrahamic covenant still flowing, that is going on. But my point is that individual salvation is not the main focus. You know, in Genesis 3:15, Adam and Eve knew that they didn't physically die. So they knew that this promise of hope provided salvation. But that is not just what this is saying. This is not just providing salvation, but also ultimate defeat. And so they lived in light of that hope and that expectation. So what happens is, typically when we talk about Messianic salvation, we're talking about the salvation that the Messiah will bring when he's ruling in the kingdom over all the earth. All right. So what that means is that when we're looking at this passage, let's go back up here. Not passage, but this portion of the argument. The seed promise and the Messianic salvation. And like I said, this is not very smooth, but we'll just go through it. Genesis 3:15 reveals that someone would fulfill the role of the serpent crusher. The one that defeated the serpent would also be the one to rule the earth. The promise was part of the content fallen humanity had to believe to be positionally saved. For them, positional salvation meant not being under the penalty of death, that they most likely understood meant eternal separation from God. When God promised they would have children, this was a surprise to them. In response, Adam called his wife's name Eve, since he believed God that the life would go on after the fall. God then provided for them tunics of skin, implying that he killed the first animal and instituted the first sacrifice. The first parents taught this to their children also, and they were accountable to God for it. From that point on, they had to bring an acceptable sacrifice according to their conscience. Sin entered the picture. Not sure if I want to probably move this around. However, humankind rebelled and joined Satan's kingdom by sinning. I'm not so much about using this language anymore. I'm saying it can't be used, but it needs to be qualified. Consider the implications of these passages. After the fall, God still made it possible for people to have fellowship with him through instituting the sacrificial system. But God was not merely focusing on, here it is, but God was not merely focusing on making spiritual salvation possible and restoring a means of fellowship with him. His prophecy of the serpent crusher relates to his plan for deliverance of the entire earth. This is Messianic salvation, where all of creation is underneath the last Adam and fulfillment of what some call the Adamic covenant. Later Revelation will tell how the theocratic millennial kingdom will be reestablished. However, since the author of Genesis is writing to prepare the second generation Israelites for going into the promised land, they are well aware of the primeval history, setting the stage for God's plan through the patriarchs. Okay, I'm mentioning that now. Then I got some stuff about Cain here. Well, what about Cain? Satan was influencing Cain to murder Abel. God uses the divine institutes to put encumbrances on Satan, to limit him, basically. But Satan is always working behind the scenes. The failure of man is seen in Cain, who takes life. Lamech made a name for himself. Prophecy for flood. The Noahic covenant became the basis for human government, and believers didn't have the responsibility and opportunity to represent God within their society. Pretty choppy right there, right? That's fine. I'll smooth it out. So let's see right here, Babel and the need for theocracy. The disobedience of humanity at the Tower of Babel is the key backdrop for understanding why God's plan is bigger than spiritual salvation. Okay, so I like this because this actually ties to the Messianic salvation stuff. So the thing is I'm going to have to fit the Cain stuff in there to reflect that stuff. I don't know. I'll figure it out. He would have not been hindered by Babel to bring the salvation, since it's always been available since the fall. Okay? Because the idea being is that if you take the assumption that the Tower of Babel was a hindrance to God's plan, since he scattered them, then this can't be talking about salvation of individuals, because individuals are always able to be saved. At least since the fall. It would not technically hinder the Messiah from coming, right? Just because the Tower of Babel was in existence. But if God is to rule over the physical land through his seed, crusher, then he must defeat the serpent and retake the land. The story of Abraham is the beginning of this move to redeeming the earth through his descendants, through Israel, and through the Messiah from Judah. God was not merely making individual salvation possible for people after the fall. Okay. I like this. Probably want to smooth it out just a little bit more, but I like that so far. Genesis 11, 1 through 9 is a description of why the nations were too corrupt for a theocracy to rise from it. The serpent knew of God's intentions to restore the theocratic millennial kingdom, so he sought to replace it with his version. Rather than being monotheistic, his counterfeit by that point was polytheistic. Babel was the gateway to the gods, and the serpent wanted humanity to believe that the way to become a god is to align with the so-called gods led by him. Babel was a result of the rebellion of humanity to spread out and fulfill the mandate of the Noahic covenant. Humanity was to bear God's name, not make a name for themselves. They were to be dependent on the one true God and interdependent on each other. Instead, the creator-creature distinction is attacked yet again. Okay, so movement 2, the Abrahamic covenant. And then I got preparatory promise and promise formalized. So I got some questions here for that. What is the relationship of seed to the Abrahamic covenant? Is it expanded on or elaborated? What's the difference between those two? How does this relate to the second Adam? How does the Abrahamic covenant relate to the second Adam, if at all, you know? To continue tracing the kingdom's relationship to the covenants from Genesis, one may either continue with humanity outside of the garden or begin with the Abrahamic covenant. So I was just thinking about, okay, you got an option here. Does the kingdom, is the kingdom withdrawn in the fall, or does it continue? If the latter path is taken, then the argument is as follows. And then I got that there to think about the implications. What is the relationship of Genesis 12 to the preceding chapters? And I've kind of got into that a little bit up here. How does it relate to Babel? Okay, so these are I got these questions here to make sure that I'm answering it either back here or in this section. What is the Abrahamic promise? What is this relation to 13, 14 through 18? What about chapter 14? How can this row exist if it's not restored unto Moses? So this is my question about a theocratic administrator, because some people would say Abraham was a theocratic administrator. Others would say no, it wasn't restored unto Moses. Now, that's beyond the scope of this paper, you know. I'll never get anywhere if I'm going through all of that. But I do have that stuff written in other papers that I could and documents that I can use for future papers. Okay. What is the contrast between Adam and Abram? Why compare them only? What is the connection? Is the Abrahamic covenant a reward? What about the covenant ceremony? Why was Abram asleep? What did the symbol mean? What is the significance of it being God alone? Where is the best place to discuss the sub-covenants? Because I'm like, okay, I need to talk about these, but where should I talk about them? What about the land? What about the seed? What about the blessing? How does this relate to the ownership of the land? How does this differ from enjoyment? What is the relationship of the Abrahamic covenant to the Mosaic covenant? So I have that, right? And then I have this, the patriarchs until Sinai, which I think is going to become the name of this section. I think that's what I had earlier. So let me just do this. Okay. Genesis 1 explains how it got lost, but not until you get to Abraham come for the restoration to be prophetic. Okay, so let's see if we can just stick this in somewhere in these questions, see the answers, or at least preliminary answers. But how's this road that's not restored with Moses? Until Moses. Okay, maybe we'll put it in here. And we'll just leave the color the same so we can see we inserted it. It was necessary for God to call out Abram and create a new nation because of the failure at the Tower of Babel. Okay, so let's go up here. We're talking about the Tower of Babel. We'll go ahead and put it here. We may move it in another place. Before God gives to Abraham a covenant, this is the basis for the dispensational plan. He first give promises to Abraham. Promise to be ratified in Genesis 15 and alluded to in Genesis 17. Okay, so that's kind of like an overview section. And so I think maybe I'll just stick it right here. Okay. God begins to work through a man to fulfill Genesis 3:15, which will restore the theocracy. Okay. Is he restoring the theocracy? That's the debate, right? So I'll just read this. God begins to work through a man to fulfill Genesis 3:15, which will restore the theocracy. In Joshua 24 is where Abe is called. Joshua is given a history lesson in Israel. They lived beyond the river and served other gods. Abe was a pagan. God led him through Canaan and multiplied descendants and gave Isaac. He tells him to walk by faith and sanctification, creating a brand new nation. Abram lived in Ur. God gives unconditional promises. God's purpose in the nation is channel blessing through the earth, as well as specific land that God spelled out later. Okay, so this sounds like this is Genesis 11, Genesis 12 type stuff. So, I'm going to go ahead and put it right here. All right. The relation to Genesis 12 and 15 in the Abrahamic covenant. That was one of my questions earlier, right? Can move this. Although the Abrahamic covenant can be found in these passages, the reason some distinguish between the promise and covenant is that God did make a promise to Abraham that implied his responsibility, which does not occur in Genesis 2:7. When Abraham asked the promise to Eric, God reassured him by ratifying the promise in covenant form. God contexts us out the to convey the covenants. So I would say this differently. This is from a previous paper that I've written. So this is trying to explain the difference between Genesis 12 and Genesis 15. So I'm going to go ahead and put this right here. Okay. Then Abram was part and prepared sacrifice. So this is related to the actual Abrahamic covenant. So I'm going to move it up. But asleep when the covenant was made. Abram passed an important test, which provided opportunity for God to say, okay, so that's additional information. It's good, but is it necessary for this paper? Let's see. While Genesis had indicated that positional salvation occurred before Abraham's call, one sees the doctrine-related salvation unfolded with Abraham. This is not necessary for this paper. That was for a framework paper. Fellowship with God relates to election, justification, and faith. Not related, not important for this paper. First, if election refers to God's choice, fellowship with God existed before it started to create Abraham kind of salvation. Not related. This paper. Implementation relates to the outworking of the decree in time and space. Not related to this paper. God's choice involved allowing a third of the angels of humanity to rebel. Okay. We've already kind of said that. God started positional salvation as a revelation himself. Okay. When God created angels, he elected them to serve. Fine. The same is true of him command. So fellowship with God regarding IF, PF, SERVF, AF, CF are all involved in the election. I don't remember what those stand for. Intimate fellowship, positional fellowship, service fellowship, arrangement fellowship, and conditional fellowship. But I don't need them for this paper. All right. The story of Abraham also unfolds justification and faith. Once again, don't need it. As for justification, typically this term refers to positional justification in Genesis 56. The vow with the perfect Aman may highlight its first moment of positional salvation in Genesis 21 to let the reader know that God is cutting a covenant with the believer. Okay, that's good, but it's not necessary for this paper. I will keep the footnote just for right now. Paul uses Genesis 15:6 and Romans 4 to support his argument that positional salvation, justification has always occurred at the moment of faith in God. All right, we don't need that. However, if the reader evaluates Genesis 15:6 without New Testament revelation, it hides his current faith to believe in God's promise of an error that God declares as righteous act in his walk. Psalms 106 and James 2:21 pertain to ethical righteousness. Great, but not good for this paper. Experiential justification occurs when God says more righteous to be righteous. It's supposed to be declares. It involves participation in pre-existing covenant associated with ethical righteousness, making the passages like James 2 about experiential justification rather than the distinction made by the reformers. Okay. Good, but not good for this paper. See, to get myself motivated in this paper, I was kind of like making a running commentary, but I realized that that's something I'm going to have to do in the future and not in the middle because I got to simplify my paper, not make it more complex. This passage also addresses spiritual imputed sin because Romans 4 quotes Psalms 32 is a passage on experiential sanctification. Don't need it. In God-given royal land grants, the recipient was already a saved servant because God did not give a covenant to an unbeliever, since covenants are service concepts, since the fall requires position of salvation as a prerequisite to participate in them. I still like that. I probably will reword it, but I'm going to leave that. Okay. The Pharaoh of the Exodus was a servant, but he was not a party in any covenant with God. This author differentiates positional salvation and positional part of the Abrahamic covenant, called positionally permanent covenant. Okay. So this is another one of my distinctions I developed in my Galatians 3 paper, but that first occurred in one of my earlier papers. I don't know if I'll include it, but it could be helpful. When a patriarch obeyed God, he experienced the blessings of the PPC. Yeah, so this could deal with explaining the ownership enjoyment idea of the covenant. I'm just going to have to move it around. While the permanence of the covenant is positional, the responsibility to follow is experiential. God gave the responsibility to remain in the land, and when a patriarch was out of the promised land, indicated he broke. This is debated. There's people that within dispensationalists that debate this. When God scattered the nation from the ground, it also stated this: nation from the ground. That's supposed to be from the earth. This means that the call to return from covenant violation occurred throughout Israel history was not necessarily a call to positional salvation. I agree with that. 3DF was the pre-fall condition of man. That's 3 dimensions of fellowship. Spiritual, social, and doctrinal, and included the call of man to serve God. All servants serve a purpose, but not all servants are positionally saved. For example, angels, Pharaoh, and Jesus himself. I don't need that for this paper, but I'll save the footnote to evaluate if I need it for anything. Okay. Experiential justification, declaration of righteous acts are thoughts done while one is in fellowship with God. We have seen that spiritual fellowship with God existed before the implementation of salvation. Since the fall of humankind, spiritual fellowship with God can only occur after the person has been positionally saved. That's true, but it goes without saying. Plus, I think I already said it before. This truth makes positional salvation the beginning point for experiential sanctification when concerns fellowship with God, as one cannot be experientially sanctified if one is not in spiritual fellowship with God. God has used covenants to regulate fellowship with God. I like that. I'm not going to use the arrangement of fellowship idea, but I'll keep this. One cannot be in fellowship with God if they are in disobedience to the express will of God found in these covenants. All right. This issue exemplifies how beneficial it could be to think of the internodal relationship between the events. That's framework stuff. And God's revelation and covenant. It's true, but we don't need it for this paper. The Edenic known and would lead to the book of Exodus events. Okay. Alrighty. So now it is a literal promise. So this is Genesis 11 and 13. The promise goes to Adam, to Noah, Shem, Terah, Haram are literal places on earth. So then it gives a land thing. So let's go to moving this up forward. We're going to use this blue as the dominant one that I structure everything around. I'm not going to keep the blue, but I'm going to use it. All right, in Genesis 15 gives a description of the land it's going to do. All right, so this is where it's talking about the land boundaries in this Genesis 15. So let's put the Genesis 15 stuff here. I know I'm going to have to move some stuff below. In prophecy, they will not be put dead, they will fill an eternal state. Differences, okay. This is good. I just don't know where I'm going to put it. It seems to be relating to the land and geophysics, so I'll keep it right here. All right, Abraham's descendants. We got that. So I'm going to once again put this in Genesis 15. All right. The kingdom is covenantal. Okay, that's still Genesis 15. God causes people to serve him while maintaining fellowship with him. This is in harmony with what is known about ancient Near Eastern contracts. Well, God makes any covenant of humanity is based on created creature distinction. Okay. God also makes arrangements to specify the parameters for fellowship. May take the form of royal land grant or Caesar vassal treaty. All right. That's good. Where am I going to put this? Because this relates to covenants all. So let me take this out of yellow, out of this color, and if suzerain gives a royal land grant, it's a reward for faithful service. Faithful, this is all right. So this is talking about all of that. This is good. This is all covenant stuff. God is distinct from. All right. Once again, this is back up to the land, Genesis 15 part. All right. Let's see the land aspect. So if this is all talking about the land, which it is, then I'm going to put it in the same place. So it's kind of interesting, even though we say land, seed, blessing, the seed seems to be, though, the issue that's dealt with first. Okay. The land aspect. So there's the seed aspect. And then the blessing aspect. I might just leave that right where it's at. That's the nature of the covenant. Okay. This looks like a tie-in for the Davidic covenant. It's a base for the sub-covenants. Okay, so looks like I'm running out of gas. So the introduction looks good. The two kingdoms juxtaposed, that's good for now. Tracing the TMK through the 9 movements, movement 1, creation of Babel. There's a few places that's choppy, but I think we made a lot of progress in that area. So probably the next time I start, I'll try smoothing out some of that stuff, but not getting bogged down, because I really need to work on this other stuff here, and more particular the patriarchs until Sinai. I need to decide. I'll probably do this. I'll probably talk about it as Genesis 12, Genesis 13, Genesis 14, Genesis 15. I probably would do it in that order. So that allows me to talk about, let's say, 11 through 14 there. And then it allows me to talk about Genesis 15 there. And so that gives me a structure to talk about things as it relates to the chapter. So that's my idea about that. And then that should allow me to condense things and see if I can answer some of these questions, eliminate redundancy, see what I need to dig in deeper. And then what I'll do after that is I'll go back through and I'll see how many pages I take up talking about the patriarchs under Sinai and compare it to Dane and see if I've reduced it. Because remember, in this section, Dane has 5 pages, I have 15. Okay. And then more particular in this section, right, as you see right here, the preparatory promise section, not much there. But like I said, this is going to extend because it's going to be some of 11 through 14. Let me put chapters so I know what it is. And that's going to help. And then the promise formalized is going to be chapter 15. And then the promise unfolded is going to be basically Genesis and Exodus related stuff about the Exodus event. So yeah, I really think that if I can just read fast, get some more flow stuff going here, don't be too picky about it, but really focus in here and smooth all this out, reorganize things like this. I think that it will reduce my paper content. So I think we started with 30 pages. We're down to 29 here. And actually we can go less than that if we there's little things you could do to psych yourself out so you recognize, okay, you're making more progress than you thought. So like, for example, the conclusions and then the intern mage, you can put all that on the same level. Intern mage with mysteries, put that on the same level. Offer and rejection, same level. And all of this, we can bring all this all together. And so what this would do is this will psychologically make you feel like you're closer to your goal of getting to 26 pages. And then all you're doing is you're not focusing on cutting pages, you're focusing on clarifying things. Let's see. We got some redundancy here. Theocracy departure. Mosaic covenant. Let's do that. All right. Notes. Let's see. Anything else? There's more that I could go in and do, but I think we get the idea. So think of it like this. As it stands, as messy as choppy as it is, I'm sitting at 28 pages. So that means I just got to cut it down by 2 more pages next time. So maybe what I do is maybe I'll say, okay, my goal is to condense, smooth out, and get it down to 26 pages. So I could go one or two ways. I could focus in on that particular area and condense it there, or I could focus on the beginning. I probably will focus on the patriarch section and try condensing and smoothing it out and things like that, which is going to reduce the amount of paper, the pages that is taken up. Well, I'm getting tired. So anyway, if you've been blessed by this, subscribe. If you haven't already, hit the bell to get notifications so that you don't miss out on content. Give us a thumbs up if you like the videos and help with the algorithm purposes. Share this with others if you think that they can benefit from this in some type of way. And please keep this ministry in prayer most of all. Plus, If you would like to donate because you've been blessed, God's blessed you through the ministry, then there's a PayPal link underneath most sections, underneath most videos, and underneath the about section. In addition to that, I'm waiting to see if I qualify for the monetization. Now that thanks to y'all, I've reached the 4,000 mark, and so yeah. Let me see if I want to show y'all that. Yeah, you see that green thing right there, 4,000. You fulfilled the 4,000 watch time requirement of being eligible for the YouTube Partner Program. It's supposedly it'll take a few days to get back, but I want to thank y'all, because y'all are the ones watching, y'all are the ones interacting, and I'm just making content. Number one, that helps me in seminary. Number two, that helps y'all as well. So God bless.